Well, good morning and welcome to the last in our series on negotiating and managing your tech contracts, practical pointers for tech entrepreneurs. I'm Ann McDonald, Business Development Director for the Corporate Tech Group at Morris, Manning & Martin. This morning, we have a special Fireside chat with Courtney Schickel from AssureSign. It's my pleasure first to introduce Matt Senroman, a key player in the MMM Corporate Technology and Tech Transactions practice group. Matt received his JD cum laude, it's too early, cum laude from the University of Tennessee College of Law, where he was an associate editor for the Tennessee Law Review and clerked for the Tennessee Supreme Court while he was in school. Matt represents clients in connection with complex intellectual property and tech transactions issues related to corporate mergers and acquisitions, outsourcing arrangements, and the development, licensing, acquisition, and distribution. Welcome and good morning, Matt.
Thanks, Ann. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Really appreciate everyone spending a potential spring break week with us this morning. Pleased to introduce you to Courtney Schickel, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at AssureSign, a fellow ATV company. I know many of you are from ATV companies. Courtney brings over 15 years of experience in developing accomplished sales and revenue divisions across multiple enterprises and industries. While she's been at AssureSign, she's been responsible for developing and driving growth within strategic partnerships, direct sales, marketing, and customer success divisions. Before joining the leadership team at AssureSign, Courtney began her sales and marketing career at Ingenious Med, where she helped accelerate the company's growth as VP of Sales. She continued her focus on revenue generation and territory development. Also, prior to that, at Vine Corp as the SVP of Sales. She's received her BS in advertising from the University of Georgia. So hopefully everybody gets some value out of a conversation between the two of us, and we'll have an open floor for questions, so you can help gather any information you can from her success. So with that, let me go ahead and get us rolling. Courtney, I just talked a little bit about your background, but tell us about your role at AssureSign more specifically, and how your background led to that position.
Sure, I'm coming up on 2 years at AssureSign this summer. So initially brought in to really help accelerate and elevate the company to the next level, the next tier. With that, we took a very small direct sales force and started to revamp it, rearrange things, and expand it pretty quickly. And then one other big focus is the partnership piece, developing better channels, going after resellers. As much as everyone loves a direct sales force, and you can get the resellers out there, then you have their entire direct sales force behind you. So it's a very fast and effective way to multiply and to grow rapidly. With that, we still have marketing. So when I was at Ingenious Med, we can jump back to that one for a second. I did have marketing under my belt for a couple of years, as well as the VP of marketing. So combining that with customer success, at AssureSign, traditionally, it was kind of a support side of the organization, and we've transitioned that to being more of a revenue-minded arm, and that's gone really well for us in the last year and a half, kind of ramping that up and moving them in that direction. That being said, we're also very fortunate. I know pandemic has had its ups and downs with companies in many various ways. And the great thing for AssureSign is we are a system that allows people to still be productive. As you're moving home, electronic signature was really a key element on keeping businesses going. So that's been a great story for us, and how we can help people accelerate and quickly keep things moving across all the different verticals that we work. My background, oddly enough, I did work with Morris Manning back at Ingenious Med, so this isn't my first time working with you guys. I was one of the original 5, starting out of a kitchen of the founder back at Ingenious Med. So seeing that company go from basically 0 revenue to an exit, we were over 25 million at the time. So just the scaling, the quick ways of building a sales team and developing stuff with marketing and customer success looped into that has been my forte, I guess, or what most of my experience has been surrounding healthcare previously, but it's been fun to jump over to AssureSign and have a little bit broader range where we have some different verticals that I can get involved in.
Yeah, and it's exactly that kind of experience that I'm hoping that you know, our participants will be able to get some value out of, because I suspect that many of them are in a startup growth stage context, and so your experience is particularly valuable to them. There's one thing you said in there that I wanted to pick up on, which is sort of the direct sales channels and indirect sales and using resellers. How have you sort of approached that decision, and when does it make sense for a, you know, a young tech company to think about using you know, an indirect sales model?
I think it makes sense for our product. One of the great differentiators that we have is the branding aspect of it. We allow people to white label. We have obvious competitors out there that everyone knows, but they really lead with their brand, their website, creating an account, and that's kind of at the forefront of that experience. With our customers, we really want them to have a more uniform experience where it's their brand that they're leading with. So for example, if you're signing up with AAA insurance, it looks like AAA is inviting you to sign. There's a small powered by AssureSign. When you start looking at the direct sales model, that makes sense for people with their own brand. But when you can branch into different resellers, there's a lot of technologies out there. Our largest verticals that we focus on are insurance, legal, and then financial systems. Think of like tax preparation type softwares. There's a large CRM type design that's out there, and people really want to be able to have that as a complete beginning to end, adding value to their current product. So if you're allowing people to manage their clients, create their applications, and go through a process, they really want to keep it one seamless experience to where it looks like it's just all through them. And so we've led with a white labeled type branding scenario. And for the resellers, it's very appealing because it just adds value to their product. From a chief revenue officer standpoint, it allows me to really multiply my sales team. I can have an individual here going after every firm, or I can get a couple of the large resellers out there, and then I have their entire sales team pushing it. And luckily, when you integrate our product, it doesn't require a lot of support or effort. If it is built in or baked in, as we like to say, to their system, they can kind of turn it on. We're here to support them as a reseller, but there's not a whole lot of implementation. It's a very quick and easy, effective way to get up and running. And it just looks like their program has yet another value adding feature in the mix.
And would you say that's been a pretty large, what % of your growth do you think has been through that white label platform go-to-market strategy?
Approximately, we're at like 60% of the envelopes that are signed. It's a little over 60% come through an integration. Now, a lot of our existing clients that are direct are integrated, but I'd say, you know, we've really ramped up, or we've added a new person to the team to help lead our partnerships. And the last 6 to 9 months, we've kicked that up a notch. So we're looking to see, you know, we usually see significant growth within our existing clients, but we've seen like a 40% kick up in new partnerships coming on because we're actively pursuing them and we're looking to find other people in the mix. And we've got a great reference or two. One of the nice things is we have 1 or 2 that are well known in their verticals. So if I use insurance as example, in the Gartner quadrants, those lovely magic quadrants that we're all familiar with, if you look under the insurance systems, we have 5 out of the 7 in the top quadrant, middle quadrant, and going down to the bottom quadrant. So there's only 1 or 2 that we're missing out of the 7 big players that are in there. So that's really helped us grow and expand naturally. But then it's helping just because of recognition, brand awareness to really go and get additional ones. So I'm looking to see like hopefully we're aiming for a 50% increase in our new partnerships and resellers for 2021.
Right, and that's something we've seen here at Morris Manning, and I've seen across my practice, is people using that sort of platform partners or reseller partners, white label partners to really get deeper market penetration.
The pros and cons of it, you don't get the brand awareness that you would love to have with some of these big partners, but that is the selling point. So that is a conversation we often have where people, initially might not be as aware of AssureSign as they are other vendors, but that's because we're behind the scenes.
Right, and then discussions about whose customer it is, and things like that, right? So that's great, and given your role in sort of shaping those strategies, how does that affect your sort of contracting? From what's your sort of philosophy from a direct sales contracting, and now if you're in a partnerships context?
It's great. In the reseller design, we have one main contract with the reseller themselves, and then it's on them to handle that part of their business, and it's usually just an add-on. So it removes a lot of that. So as long as we have a great system in place where there's an understanding of whose customer it is, how that is structured, it's on the reseller moving forward. Again, it's their customer. So we really want them to own and maintain as much of it as we can. So we're just kind of behind the scenes in that scenario. They accept terms and conditions basically, but we're not super heavy on that side of the sales spectrum. On the direct side, I mentioned one of our top verticals is legal. So you know that they're always going to be redlining and looking to make some tweaks to our agreements. That is kind of a fast-paced transaction model for our direct sales team. So if you think small business mid-market, they're not very high dollar amounts, but it's a very basic, it's still a software as a service agreement. So we do kind of churn through those pretty quickly. We need to have the ability to get those back and get them back fast because there are a lot of competitors out there with what we're trying to do. We want to close them, we want to close them quickly. So it's important for us to kind of be able to flip these back, 24, 48 hour turnaround. My preference and what I've enjoyed working with your team, I like to handle the business terms. And a lot of times there are agreements that don't come over to you guys, right? It's just a term or a renewal clause, or it's something that I can certainly handle on my own. When people start diving into warranties, liabilities, that's when I don't really want to touch the red lines or make any edits. And it's a great way to be able to work with your team and kind of separate the two pieces. We all know when you go through negotiations, you want to know what the list is. I don't want to answer what my response is to number one until I know what number two and number three are that they're asking. And it really allows me to separate the business part and just say like, oh, I don't touch those. But then what we can do is offline. I know Brian and I are waiting to get some responses back. Then we can kind of look at the whole picture, figure out what the right balance is. And really our goal is, I don't believe that contracts should ever hold up a deal. If they want to do business with us and we want to do business with them, we want it to be a sound decision on our part. But we also want it to be one to where we can move forward quickly and we can get it done. I don't want a window of where another vendor can sneak in and they'll try to, right? So we want to close the business and have everyone feeling good moving forward. So it's been a nice experience for us. It's certainly developed. I think I started working with you guys maybe 10 years ago when I was at Ingenious Med. So I'm in a little bit different position now. I didn't have as much interaction with your team directly back then. I think our COO handled most of the contracts, but it's so easy. It just makes it to where I can flip them over. There are certain things that I don't touch, I don't understand, and I can always rely on your team to help me there.
Yeah, and so given your sort of long history and working on contracts, and what would be some tips you could give about how you sort of organized it internally, so that you can handle those issues that are business items or that don't necessarily require Morris Manning or a lawyer's sort of input, so that you can, one, be efficient in getting the contract done, not letting that be holding up the deal. And two, save money on legal costs, because we get it. It's all that's just revenue out the door. that you'd rather not spend unless it's one of those major issues that, is something that I really want to take a look at.
Right. And I will say too, I mean, it depends on who the client is and the size of the opportunity. I will be more lenient on some than I will others. For me, I think it's learning, when I started, I was early in my career. So I was kind of the only salesperson that had the ability from our execs to negotiate some of the contract items, but it's because I had a cheat sheet and I knew what the items were that we were willing to give on. So for example, governing law, everyone always starts with their own, and that's one where we know there's some neutral options that pretty much work anytime. So you always start with that standard, but then, if that's what comes back, I can make that edit in 2 seconds. So I think if you can kind of have your business terms or the items that are quick, common fixes, I know those by heart at this point. But when I first started, I had my cheat sheet or my go-to language if somebody wanted something to be mutual versus one-sided. I know exactly how to make that change, and I know which sections I can do that in. Once we get past that, I do think it's helpful to, before you send something over or understanding which sections I don't want to touch, I avoid, and I do think like some of them could go either way, like data security type things. Like I'm going to flip over and just make sure that we're staying within the lines. And some of the jargon is just, I'm like, what are we saying here? It gets, I'm a salesperson with business terms. So when we get into the legal spaces, caps on things and what that means, that's just out of my league. So I'd rather you guys handle that. And I think if you can just kind of have your cheat sheet of, which sections you need to work on, get the whole picture first though. I never really want to respond with, I'll give you this, sure you can have that. If there's other pieces that based on what they're asking for, I think it's really helpful if you get a lot of red lines back that you can just call your team and just look at the bigger picture of if we change this, then we need to adjust that. Knowing what those connections are. So just create a cheat sheet where quickly, and I think my sales team knows if it's regarding renewal rates or the term or some of the basics. I think they all know now too, like if they push back on governing law, we're going to give on that one and make it a neutral state. That's a great example of we're not trying to hold up agreements. We're not trying to make them, completely one-sided, protect yourself, but also give your client a sense of feeling good about what they're tied into and moving forward with.
Yeah, having that playbook or that cheat sheet that you're mentioning is something that we see a lot of our clients do. So they can, and it's a way for them to sort of train their sales team to know, here are some issues. If you see pushback, this is what we do next, right? So do you ever incorporate sort of sales team training, contract 101? You don't need to know everything. You don't need to understand all the contract, but here are some points that you could handle, that's not even necessarily with me, Courtney, my involvement, but you could handle yourself. Do you implement any processes like that?
Absolutely. I think they know there's like 3 to 4 things that they have free reign to just tweak. There are a number of agreements that come in that I sign that I've never seen the contract for. They know what their limits are. There's 1 or 2 things, like for example, governing law is the easiest one just to use. They can flip that. They know the states that they can put in there if that's what they ask for. I don't need to check that one and review it. And it's great. The more that you can give them the ability to feel like they own the whole process, it's a great learning experience for them, and it gives them a lot of excitement on really driving their own deals from beginning to end. And then if there are items that are bigger or they're getting some back and forth, then having the ability to elevate, even though I don't know that my stance on things are going to be that harsh or one way or another, but then just to throw it over to another person, which is exactly how I use your team too, right? If I'm not sure, do we want to give on this or do we not? Like I can always kind of throw it over to another party. So it just allows you to have the ability to escalate or to not be the person having to make the hard decision on it and look at it to where you can do it as a team.
Right. And so where do you think, for a tech company, what's the best place when the playbook is you're outside the playbook, all right, and your sales team has escalated to you, what areas do you think it's best to get somebody like Morris Manning involved? Just to take a second look. Is there any specific areas, or do you always do that?
12 and section 14. I'd have to look back. I don't really mess with the limitation of liability sections. I don't really go near warranties or indemnification. If indemnification is just the simple make it mutual, and that's the only tweak that they're making, that one I've got kind of my go-to how to tweak that one, but I would say those I definitely leave up to you guys. There's John. I just saw him pop up on my screen. But those would be the main ones. And then I think on some of the privacy type stuff or confidentiality, I know what our general purpose is. If they start digging into that a bit more, I do flip that over to your team just to make sure that the way that it's worded is in fact what we're intending to do. That's, security and privacy is a big thing. Obviously, what we're dealing with is signing documents for, legal, insurance, financial type scenarios. People really want to make sure that that stuff is secure, and obviously that is a big part of our business. So I have no problem slipping that one over just to make sure that I think even just the fact that they know it's coming from an attorney to their team. My title's sales. If I'm the person negotiating it, saying this is coming from our attorney versus a salesperson, there's an element of that just adds to the mix as well. There's just a sense of, trust and a higher level of you guys, that's your business. So tweaking those sections, really just relaying that from, I try to get their counsel on the phone as well, let you guys speak to each other. Like minds think alike on those sections, so it's just easier to get myself out of the mix.
Yeah. Do you ever use this kind of
stigma?
Yeah, and the other thing is, you might be signing a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year deal, a long-term commercial relationship, and you might be working with that company for the next few years. The lawyers are there and then they're gone, and nobody really remembers who they were at that time, right? And so, do you ever use a strategy of, good cop, bad cop, where you've got the lawyer gets to be the bad cop, you get to use that to sort of preserve your good relationship over the long term, and the lawyer sort of the back cop is gone. Is that something you ever do?
I like to think that I'm the good cop, but probably not. It just depends on what's coming from the other end. I mean, again, my goal is to get it done, but within reason. And then just depending, there's elements of it too, just depending on how they're approaching it. Is it a good, do you feel like this is a good partner? Do you feel like they're trying to work with you on this, or do you feel like they're trying to make it one-sided in their direction? If that's the case, then we can certainly shift and good cop, bad cop, who it is on our end. And it's also one where you can delay, right? You can say, let us discuss, and I know Brian mentioned on our call yesterday, like, let me speak with my client offline. And they don't even have to know who the good cop or bad cop is sometimes. They just know that there is one. And we're going to come back with something that works for us all. But it's an interesting dynamic. I think it really depends on how they're going about it as well, what the asks are on their end. Does it feel like something that we're working towards a mutual, or is it feeling one-sided? My goal is not for it to ever feel like, we're just taking hard lines and we're only in it for AssureSign's protection. I want it to be something to where it's a sound agreement and everyone's in the mix together, and we all feel like it's a good way to move forward. We do have a 99%-ish renewal rate, and what's in our contracts is kind of the automatic renewal. So in most cases, what you agree to, we do a 3 year and a 1 year as our standards, which I think is kind of the norm that's out there. But that is the case, right? You're in it for 3 years or 1 year, and then it's going to automatically renew and continue to go. So you want it to be something. I don't want to do renewal negotiations or redo agreements. I want it to be something that's in place that everyone's comfortable and happy with. Like, yes, there might be renewal rates that we can adjust depending on where people start, how much they've grown, or what their volumes are today, but I don't want to spend my time doing renewals. If people are happy and want to continue moving forward, you just want it to be an automatic, seamless process. So if you do it right and do it right from the start, that should be the case. There shouldn't be things that we're trying to go back or tweak, or people feel like they need to revisit them.
Right. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Having those automatic renewals is definitely advisable for that exact reason. reducing any friction so you can just roll over to the next term makes complete sense. Let me ask you this, because in my experience, you rarely lose deals over terms. We try to be sales friendly. We know the revenue is the most important thing, and we don't want to do anything to put the company in jeopardy. And so obviously we're taking a look at it from that perspective, but we want to get the deal done, right, and get the revenue coming in the door. How often do you see? Because sometimes we do have clients that they hesitate to make a request because they're worried about losing that deal. How often do you see deals really break down over a negotiation or over a deal? I mean, does that happen to you guys?
I have not ever experienced that here. And I never experienced that with IngeniousMed either. That wasn't really our approach with it. Healthcare has a little bit different realm of, I think what AssureSign works with and the size and the type of transaction that we're doing gives us a little bit more wiggle room. Healthcare was a little bit more stringent. I've never lost a deal in that scenario at either company. I don't think it's something that, the biggest challenge that we do have, I will say where it does get a little bit trickier, is we do have scenarios where a client wants to start with their agreement. So we have a handful of those. I can think of one in particular. It's an international pharmaceutical type company, and they sent us 15 pages of their own agreements. It was a lot, and it was very difficult because with ours, like, we know what we're trying to say, what we're conveying, and what we want to protect, and what we know that we need in place. When you're starting with their agreement, you've got to figure out and find, are these things in there? What else is added, and how does this go? So I'd say that was probably the toughest ones I've had, were their agreement starting, and that's new to us, right? And that's new to you guys. So it's digging through it and figuring out, how do we make it work for both sides when we typically are used to starting on our own turf. So that's been a trickier one. And, depending on the industry, I understand why that one, because they were like a pharmaceutical international type company, there was a lot more to that agreement that they were concerned about than what we typically deal with on a large personal injury law firm in town, making sure is covered. But I don't have a recollection of losing one for that reason at all. Because even in both those cases, I mean, it may have taken us 4 or 5 rounds of getting through all the different sections, parts, and pieces, but we got there. I didn't touch it. I will say, once you have that many red lines and things going, I was horrified, and I didn't want to own the document or be responsible for accepting or any of the edits or changes. I left that back to you guys. Some of them can get very confusing, very lengthy. And then even what was, round 2, round 3, round 4, understanding where the edits landed and what the final document needs to be is a tricky situation there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really valuable perspective for the audience, because I do experience clients that are, they want the revenue and they don't want to lose the deal, and so they don't want to do things that they're that might cause them to lose the deal. And I rarely see it happen. The worst they can do is say no, right? And then we figure out what we want to do. Where I have seen a deal is where the nature of the technology is such that, like, the data use provisions have to be a certain way. We have to have the right to de-identify so we can train the AI, for example, right? And in healthcare, go ahead.
As long as it's something that we can do and manage, do we have our preferred options? Yes. But again, like, as long as it's in the joint of a positive partnership to where I think we can get both sides comfortable, I've never seen us have trouble getting there.
Right. So what you've been using for a few years now, Courtney, our CMS, our contract management system. How has that worked for you guys? We've got specifics or SLAs and things around that. We even leverage non-attorney contract managers. How has that process helped here? Has there been a good balance between efficiently getting deals done while also protecting the AssureSign?
I think it just helps from an organization and coordination standpoint. I feel like for me, it's like when it rains, it pours. I'll have a week or 2 where we have no new red lines or agreements, and then all of a sudden I get hit with the one that I mentioned, I had two at the same time where they wanted to start with their version. And one of them was very lengthy and had multiple addendums and parts and pieces, and it's hard to keep track of all those. You know, my way is just writing them on my whiteboard and figuring out what's out and what I've got to get red lines and stuff back for. So using the attaching CMS support or MM law, like I know it autofills and it's on all of mine. It just helps me keep it tracked, keep it coordinated. And then we know, there's always kind of like a 24-hour turnaround. We get them back fairly quickly. It's just been nice from a coordination standpoint. And then I think when organizations or our prospects about to be customers sees us in a very clean, organized manner, it's a plus for them too, right? They see us, we've got it together, we know what we're doing, and we've got a streamlined way to handle and respond. It's very easy. And then I like that I get my little report every Monday, and so I can remember, because sometimes these drag out. Sometimes people have us redline agreements before they've selected their final vendor. So there's one or two, like if you're going through an RFP process, that's happened to us a few times. So there are some that are out there. And I do get busy and I do get things buried in my inbox. So it's just nice to be able to have just a very clean, organized way. And then everything's uniform. So I can shoot things back, and I usually copy the salesperson on it now as well. Kind of what you brought up earlier, like they know which parts and pieces they can and cannot change, but I also want them to understand the process and get more and more familiar as well, so they can see when things go back and forth. Oftentimes there's internal discussion before we send it back to the prospect. So allowing them to start to see some of those parts and pieces and understanding, what decisions are we making before we accept or send back the revisions, and bringing them into that as well. So it gives us a nice way to organize it and to manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to make sure that I'm saving some time for people in the audience to ask some questions. Is there anything that way they can leverage your experience? Did anybody in the audience have a question that they wanted to ask Courtney while we have her here?
Hey, Matt, Sean O'Shea. Just a quick question. I've a lot of similar experiences in terms of the joys of contract management and finding things together, and particularly red lines when you have the changes that occur. I guess the question is, after you're kind of done with the CMS process of actually getting the contract negotiated, there's always kind of those unique terms and the things that will come back to be needed when you either have something that affects another department, or when you finally get to a transaction, you need to explain everything that's not standard. Kind of what's your approach for being able to kind of handle that and keep that in line?
I have a very good memory, and so I can usually kind of, if it is something out of the norm, we can recall those pretty quickly, but we are trying to track and manage. And I think that's something that we can continue to grow and get better at. I know, allowing the MMM team to take a bigger active role in that as well. We just implemented to where when a contract is signed, obviously we have them all signed via AssureSign. We've added in there an automated process to where they get a copy of every completed agreement through that. So like when it's signed, our implementation team gets it, our CEO team gets it, and MMM gets it. That's built in there as well. So the biggest thing for us, we don't go very far. I mean, I feel like software as a service agreements are so standard these days that we don't have a whole lot of things out there. The one that's probably a bigger challenge for us is SLAs.
Yeah.
So if there's a service level agreement, and in those cases, we are tracking that in our CRM. So we have anything with all the agreements attached to it. If there's anything when a deal is closed that's a little bit out of the norm, we do make notes of it in our CRM system, which is ultimately our go-to place for all information. So whether it's billing, anything, like we don't have a lot of downtime. If there is something where a contract was tied to that, we've got it all flagged there. We've implemented a new system as well that's supposed to help kind of automate some of those flags and track all that for us. But we're trying to kind of streamline them as best we can, but we don't have a lot of strange extremes.
All right, good here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Sean. Any other questions?
I've got a question for Courtney, and Courtney, this is a question that relates to also to the fact I know we've got Lucy Skelton and Sean O'Shea some other CFOs on the phone. And one of the questions that I know they are dealing with is financial projections.
Okay.
And so they're, unfortunately for them, having to constantly be queried about where are we against the forecast? How are we doing? And maybe Sean and Lucy can pipe in, but I mean, I suspect that they don't want to be the ones that always have to answer that question. They got to come back to people like you and say,
Right.
okay, Courtney, how are we doing? And they don't necessarily want to have, your happy smiles. They want to have, tell us exactly what the situation is, Courtney. Where are we on this? How do you deal with that? Whether it's Dave, your CEO, or whether it's a CFO or a board member, how do you turn off the sales side and communicate in a way that's much more realistic with the financial people?
I think for me, having an organized process really helps because I'm not confused and I'm not, wondering where things are. And I think we can tell when something comes in, I know what our turnaround time is, and I try to look at who the client is on the other side. If I know the size of the corporation or the field or industry that they're in, I adjust my timelines. I would typically say, like, we have a contract that we got in yesterday. There's a few things that we're going back and forth on. And I stated on the call, we should be able to wrap this up. Let's get this signed and be done by Friday, and setting that expectation. Now that means that I'm probably going to tell our CFO and our CEO Tuesday, because that's realistic. I'm going to push it and I'm going to drive it, but I am going to give myself a day or two because I also don't have complete control over the other side. But I think one of the things that people forget, and I do push my salespeople to learn this, just because you get some red lines back and you flip it over to me or we flip it over to your team, there's still an element of understanding the parts and pieces. It's not like we got a contract and we're redlining. They still need to help drive that. They still need to help push that and say, if we can get these red lines back to your team, what does the rest of your sign-off process look like? So my job is to help my sales team really understand those parts and pieces. There are large organizations, one of our largest customers, their procurement process, it's 45 days at best. So knowing as much of that as you can going in, it's really my job to understand that process and teach my sales team to get better and better with that. And then I can give you a forecast or a realistic expectation. If it's a $5,000 deal, a small business starter pack, those are going to come, and those are going to come quickly. So really just looking at, larger deals, obviously, more details, more people involved, more sign-off processes. And something to learn too, certain dollar amounts require different levels of sign-off, right? If I know 2 different people have to sign off on it versus 1 at a certain level, incorporating that into the mix. It's really a reminder too, though, as much as I have to give the answer, it's a great training tool for your sales team to really understand that. It's not like somebody asks for a contract and they're like, done at the finish line. There's still some steps to go through and to understand it. So really digging into making sure every step of the way that we're driving them and understanding, who has to sign off on this. It's spring break. Are they out? That's another part or piece. 2 people have to sign off on it, but 2 of them are out for spring break. There's all those elements. So I think as long as you're organized and you have a clean understanding of where each contract is and what the expectation is, you can really get a better feel for where we are, what we can do. And then it goes back to your sales team too. I'd like to keep a balance. I don't say you sandbag, but I would say if you have a large deal and you're really counting on it, making sure that there are some smaller deals in the mix and things that you can do to make sure that it's not feast or famine. Balance it. That's, oftentimes we all have one deal that can really make or break your year, or that you're hoping makes it, but making sure that we're not counting on that just from a forecast perspective, and that we've got all the other parts and pieces, the smalls and the mediums, still going, because that can really help make a difference. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does. I think that's just one of those issues that the financial officers have to have a good person like you that they can work with and honestly talk to. So good info.
I've had really good CFOs in the past. The one that I work with today, and I think he's very in tune with sales. He sits on our weekly pipeline call. Same thing at Ingenious Med. He was very in tune with it, and he understands the process as well. So as long as we we come across as knowledgeable and truly understanding the parts and pieces, then I think you can be confident in what I'm saying as far as this is coming or this isn't coming. And just know that when we tell you those numbers, you can be good to go and count on them and not worry like, yeah, you said that last week and you said that last week. The more information we have, the better.
Yeah, that's great. Matt, I see that Diedrich Thomas asked a question about the CMS system. He wanted to know if it's tailored to individual companies or if they're pre-populated templates that are leveraged. I think it's a combination of both, but you may want to talk briefly about, what you do in building templates, and also the idea of optional provisions that might be helpful to somebody that's negotiating an agreement, like when Courtney's negotiating a standard agreement, but she's got to have some optional provisions to drop in.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Dedrick. It is both. We obviously put together tailored. We have templates that we use for companies, and then clearly we would need to tailor them for the particular company. But the playbook or the cheat sheet that Courtney was referring to earlier is another thing that our sort of CMS programming captures, so that you can have the optional provisions. When a customer pushes back on the warranty, what's a fallback provision, or what's acceptable, or where are the do not change provisions, and where are the governing law has been the example we've been using. Acceptable alternatives. So Georgia might be Delaware, or might be New York. Right, exactly. And those are the ones that most people are going to be comfortable with. You'll be able to get through that roadblock pretty quickly. So yeah, absolutely, and happy to talk with you further offline about the program. Great question.
Thank you for that. Just real quick for Courtney, I really do appreciate your the time you spend in giving your experience. If there was one thing that you could do differently, or one thing that now that you could have curtailed back when you started, to kind of give other people that may be going through the similar process advice, what would that thing be?
I think it's just, trust your team and don't ever let a contract, just the language or getting caught on one or two terms, prevent you from doing business moving forward. As long as you feel like it's someone that wants to be a good partner, find the happy mediums. I don't get caught up on the details. I wouldn't say, if you can ask my former CEO of 12 plus years, I don't give stuff away. We have very clean agreements. I think the goal would just be keep it clean and keep it simple. Don't complicate it. Don't get too wrapped up in it, and just trust your team to know that you're still going to be safe and secure with what we agree upon. But don't make contracting more than it needs to be.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Courtney, let me ask you a question too. At what point do you feel like, and you may have mentioned this earlier, but do you ever have to go to your CEO? Is that your escape valve of basically being able to say, look, there's just no way that the CEO is going to agree to this, and I'm going to have to go to him. It's going to slow the process down. Is that part of the negotiating strategy, or do you try to keep him out of it?
I try to keep him out of it. I will say, I can give two scenarios. And Gina said I was there for 12 years. So I think I was very trusted, and I was probably in the early days allowed to run with a number of things. I know when I kind of reach my limits, and if there's one or two things that I do need to feel like I need to get sign off on, I can and I will. And then once I do it once, I don't usually go back for that same scenario. I just put it in my back pocket and know that I got it approved once. Why wouldn't I do it again if it meant that I could get the deal closed? It kind of goes back to that playbook and that cheat sheet. Again, keep it simple, get them done. It doesn't need to be a major conflict. I've only been here for approximately 2 years. So I probably did the first couple of agreements. I asked questions on things that, hey, I would totally give on this. Is that what you typically do? Is that okay? And Dave gave me the nod on a number of things. So now I just do them. So ultimately, I don't want to have to involve him in every detail. As you grow and scale, that's part of it, right? We can't all have our hands in every single item. Same thing with the governing law and smaller pieces where I don't want to have to review every agreement with my sales team. I want them to be able to be fast and efficient, knowing that they're doing the right things and that they have the tools and the support to be confident in doing that. But my biggest thing is less is more, and the less people you have to have involved and you can move forward faster, more effectively. So maybe 2 or 3 questions here and there, and then I never ask them again.
It's a good point.
I
Matt, let me ask.
I was on the phone. I don't know if that makes you nervous or not, but I do have a very good track record of clean agreements. I don't put a lot of strange stuff on them. I don't give a lot of outs. Like they are pretty standard across the board.
So Matt, let me ask you and Courtney this question. Courtney, you sort of alluded to this, but you put together a contract management system, basically being able to manage the contracting process, come up with standard templates, come up with optional provisions. Courtney knows the process that she follows. You sort of align what works together. Maybe, Courtney, you can talk about how AssureSign and digital signatures fits into that. So a lot of folks that are here participating today on this webinar are folks in negotiating contracts. And I'm just wondering, how should they be thinking about AssureSign as a part of this overall contract process to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about us is we get to the final stage, and it's honestly like your final selling live demo of what we do. So it's a great thing to be able to show them, whether it's multiple people that need to sign off on it. We have our own template and workflow. So, there's a few people that can sign off on our agreements. It's automated. And then I mentioned earlier that we even have it now to all completed agreements will be routed to MMM or even attach the same CMS portal. So it's a nice clean workflow. It speeds it up, and I think it's just a great selling point. And I don't see people going back to paper anytime soon. Once you do this, it's a much faster, efficient. The copies go to every place. You can build it to where the signer on the other end, plus your team, plus your finance department, plus your implementation gets a customized email to where the entire process is kicked off. And it's nice and clean, and it's a lot faster for those of us that used to, call around and chase down the paper signing and where is it and getting it faxed to you. That's a little bit painful, and you can do this in a matter of minutes. One of the things that we see a lot of, I can tell you that we're all on Zoom calls back to back to back these days. Email signature is kind of the common one out there because you're reviewing the agreement, but I know what the agreement says because we sent the clean version. So people aren't really looking to read through the contract one last time. They've got the final version and they know it. They just want a fast, easy way to sign it. Our SMS feature is great. One of the things I am guilty of is multitasking. When on Zoom calls, I use my phone and I can sign agreements. And nobody even knows it, but I know what the signing invite looks like when I see the thing pop up that I have a new contract to sign. I use my phone and I just have it right down here. And I can sign off on a minute or two. With texting, you see, it's kind of funny. You look at texting versus email. It's a lot smoother, faster process. The way to get people is on their phones now. Average time for someone to respond to a text is about 90 minutes as an average. Emails are hours. And then even open rate on emails these days, you're in the 50% or lower range on emails that are even opened a couple hours after they're sent. When you look at text messaging, you're averaging 90 minutes, and it's significantly higher, more like 70% of how many people respond in the first 90 minutes, and it's done. So it's just a lot more effective, faster. In our industry, I mean, there are a lot of signature products out there. So speed and getting it done and getting it finalized is really important. And then particularly for us, it's our product. So if that in signing or getting someone on board is not smooth and doesn't show them like this is what your experience is going to be for all of your customers going forward, we'd be in a really bad spot. For us to not nail or wow the final contract signing experience would be a huge shame. So it's something that we certainly use, and we use our own statistics, but it's kind of showing them like, here's what you're about to step into, and here's what your process is going to look like for your team moving forward, but on an outward bound scenario as opposed to inward.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You certainly don't want to fumble the contracting process at AssureSign. Excellent. Do we have any? I know we just a couple minutes left. Any last questions? Courtney, thanks so much for your time. This has been super valuable, and I'm sure that all the participants have gotten a lot out of your experience in sort of this contracting process.
So Matt and Courtney, let me ask a final question. This is a softball question to Courtney, but it's a good question. I think everybody on this webinar is thinking about it. So Courtney, AssureSign's a great company. It's an Atlanta company. We're honored to be working with you. But somebody might go back and say, listen, that AssureSign company is pretty sharp, and Courtney seems to know what she's doing. But how do they compare with the other companies that are doing the same kind of thing? Why should we go with AssureSign versus somebody else? I'm sure you get that question from time to time. And other than the fact that you all are an Atlanta-based company and doing really well, what are some other reasons people should be thinking about using AssureSign?
Absolutely. I mean, we know who our major competitors out there. If someone's not familiar with DocuSign, I don't know where you've been living in the last couple of years. They're big and they're out there. But really, we are an Atlanta-based company. We have a very different, unique culture. We've talked about leading with their brand, right? We're not trying to be AssureSign all over the place and that being their user experience. We want it to be our customer's brand. So we take the back seat. We do more of the powered by AssureSign behind the scenes. And that allows our customers to really create a more unique experience, or sticking with their own look and feel, which is a better in insurance and legal world. People do get weary of kind of jumping to another page or another system or another name, or it looks like somebody else is asking you to sign something versus the agent that you were talking to. It does create problems. So we are more streamlined. We were the only vendor with SMS. I know one of our competitors has beta launched it recently, but we've got 2 years under our belt of success with SMS, and we were the first ones out there. And it really made a difference. For the legal, I can tell you, personal injury is one of our more successful sectors. That's huge to them. The ability to get people signed on and signed on quickly. The SMS is the way to go. So that is one thing. And then Atlanta based in our culture. I mean, if you meet our company and you meet our team, you're going to love them. We're partners. We're here to work with you. And I think that is the appeal. We do more of a, smaller mid-market scenario very, very well, because they're big, important clients to us. And there's a little bit more of a personal approach. And, you're kind of at the top of our list, where they would be a smaller client to a DocuSign or Adobe Sign. And so they're not going to get the customization. They're not going to get someone diving in and saying, what are you trying to do? Let's create the workflows with you. Like, it's just a more hands-on experience and a different feel. So it's been fun. My background has been in kind of, in Genius, but I was there from the start through the 25 million stage. So I've experienced, 5 employees up to 200 employees. AssureSign is at the growing point and the rapid rate of where I really love to be in a company. There's elements of it from a culture standpoint. We're still aggressive and we're still willing to try things, and we're not we're developing processes, but we're not holding ourselves back based on processes. And that's really driven by our customers and our clients. Like, that's where we get some of our best ideas on how to grow, how to expand, and then we can utilize that. So we really approach things as a joint partnership. And I will say I historically, healthcare, IT, we were on site. We were out doing presentations. I know that's not the case today, and we don't have as much at AssureSign, but if you are local in Atlanta, we look forward to being able to meet with our clients and even send, a trainer over and to work with your team. Not the case lately. Obviously, we know why, but that is something to where we want to know our customers and we want to be engaged with them. And last thing on that, most people start with a specific need or use for our product. After the first year, the majority of our clients exceed a doubling the number that they started with, because once you get in and you get it working in one scenario, you really can grow and develop and work with our team to figure out all the other parts and places, things that we can automate, things that we can expand. So there's internal use, external use, really helping you grow and continuing to be more efficient.
It's a great response. It's that tender love and care that a local company can provide. So we appreciate it.
Looks like I've got one more question here from Bob Morgan in the chat, talking about real estate in particular, and where a company might think about starting with this SLA process. Certainly, we have a number of service level agreement type templates that you would take a look at. Those are very operationally driven. You're going to want to look at what you're doing and making sure that your SLA lines up with. I'm sure Courtney would agree with that. and making sure that your SLA lines up with how you're actually, what's your support response times, what's your typical resolution time, what's your uptime, what has that been historically. So we could certainly provide you that framework and then help you work through some of the details that are consistent with how you're actually operating. Great question, Bob. And Courtney, would you say that's how you handle your SLAs as well?
I think we keep those pretty standard. I mean, I will say I'm very proud that our SLA, honestly really kind of highlights our company. Our uptime guarantee is, the 99.99 plus scenario. We don't get a lot of pushback. We're not throwing something out there that doesn't really provide a top level of what people would expect from a top-notch SaaS company. So response times and all those things, we've never had anyone feel like this isn't enough. I can say in the healthcare world, there was a little bit more variation or what people would require. So as long as you can still manage it or your levels are close enough to where you can work with that. Again, I think SLAs are one, I know I said don't get caught up in agreements. I do think SLA would be one that you can stand on a little firmer, because it is something that they need to understand that, you have a level of service that you're committing to your client base as a whole. If there is just something that's it's a large corporation, it's a deal breaker, if they don't have XYZ, as long as you can manage it. But I think if that is one that I don't give a lot on, and I just think as long as you have a standard of what you're providing that's up there, turn it away from a negotiation and make it a selling feature. Talk to them about, this is what our standard is. We don't deviate from it, but here's why. Find me another company that can show you, 99.99 plus year after year. We don't have an issue here. So making sure, it's kind of the sales stigma that I have, but negotiations don't have to be figuring out terms. A lot of times it can be selling what your terms are.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. That's SLAs is one where you can stand firm, and as long as you're within that market framework, it's not going to be a problem for the most part.
I can't imagine anyone would have one out there that's like a 70% uptime, right? You're not going to be in business.
Right. Well, we're 1 minute over. I appreciate everybody joining. Courtney, thank you so much for your time. Very valuable input. We'll send this recording out to everybody, so you've got a copy of it. Thanks for being part of our MMM web series on tech contracts.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.